So Pitch Perfect is a thing. It's no secret that I'm a fan of musicals, so it follows that I would like Pitch Perfect, but... No, I'm just joking, I do actually like Pitch Perfect. At least the first one. I also know that many people make no secret of their dislike and perhaps downright hatred of musicals, and that's cool too, but just hear me out on this one because I think Pitch Perfect might be the perfect musical for people that hate musicals. I was in my undergrad when Pitch Perfect first came out, and I was at some school function where they had it playing for students to watch. Because of this, I only half saw the movie, and I remember thinking that it was really stupid. Little did I know that it was incredibly stupid, but it kind of revels in its own stupidity and makes no apologies for taking the world of competitive a cappella singing as serious as, well, anything else.
Sorry, it's pretty lame.
Excuse me? Synchronized lady dancing to a Mariah Carey chart topper is not lame.
But the movie had me intrigued, and so I watched it soon after, and I was suitably impressed. I mean, the stupidity was not lost on me, but I enjoyed the comedy aspect of a bunch of singers taking themselves way too seriously. And the movie includes some pretty fantastic musical numbers and performances from some ridiculous characters.
I set fires to feel joy.
That's adorable.
As a fan of musicals, it was not hard to appreciate what this movie was. It wasn't a bombastic showstopper or even an indie darling, it sort of became a kind of runaway hit, but it's really just an enjoyable middle-of-the-road musical comedy. And yet many people I've talked to who dislike musicals actually really enjoyed this movie, and some people don't even consider it a musical. But that's preposterous, right? There's no way that Pitch Perfect isn't a musical. And yet there are a few things that make this movie unique amongst musicals. A few things that even the sequels didn't seem to be able to recapture. Things that made this one musical movie big enough to warrant sequels, but also draw non-musical fans in. Things like the balance of comedy and campiness, the kind of musical that this is, and how that plays into how musicals are adapted into film and presented to audiences. These things are pretty smart in their simplicity, and yet their execution led to the perfect musical for people who hate musicals. And so today, I want to talk about Pitch Perfect. Pitch Perfect started out with Mickey Rapkin, a senior editor at GQ magazine, following a competitive season of the collegiate a cappella competition in the United States, which inspired him to write the book Pitch Perfect in 2008. A screenplay by Kay Cannon was adapted from the book and was then picked up by Elizabeth Banks and her husband's production company, Brownstone. Like many musicals, there's a large cast of main and supporting characters, and they're all played by incredibly talented actors. Many of them have gone on to star in Broadway productions, become masters of comedy, and establish themselves as respected and hardworking devotees to the craft, and in a large part that's thanks to this movie. And for sure the cast is a superb group of singers and dancers with great comedic timing, but the movie was also directed by Jason Moore, the absolute unit who staged the Tony Award-winning Avenue Q, which if you haven't seen, you should rethink your life. The movie was filmed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with Louisiana State University acting as the fictional Barton University. The film opened in fall of 2012 and did decently well, especially with female audiences. The movie took some time, but eventually exploded in popularity and became a box office hit, which allowed for the creation of two sequels. The first of which is the highest grossing musical comedy of all time, beating out School of Rock, and was the highest grossing musical of all time until 2 years later when Beauty and the Beast came out. Despite the success of the franchise, I'm really only interested in the first movie, but for the sake of comparison, I will also briefly skim over the sequels, so spoilers all around for any of those. After a disaster involving projectile vomit during her performance, Aubrey is left with only her friend Chloe to try and re-establish the Barton Bellas as a respectable part of the competitive collegiate a cappella scene. Meanwhile, disenfranchised freshman Becca is only interested in producing music and working at the college radio station. After a very, very open conversation in the shower, Chloe convinces Becca to audition, where new students attempt to show off their skills for one of the 4 a cappella groups on campus. Becca is late and unprepared but sings anyway, and is successful in becoming a Bella along with some other interesting characters. Jessie, Becca's co-worker at the radio station, has also joined an a cappella group called the Treblemakers, and their mutual interest in music continues to bring them closer despite the competition between their groups.
I know you have a toner for Jessie.
What?
A toner? A musical boner?
Yeah, that's not a thing, and you're not the boss of me.
Chloe is enthused and feels Becca will be able to bring new life into the Bellas, but Aubrey is less than impressed and thinks that the Bellas should look and act a certain way.
I am confident that we will find 8 super hot girls with bikini-ready bodies who can harmonize in a perfect pitch, okay?
But the Bellas' old-school routines prove to bore audiences, and when Becca improvises a mashup on stage, Aubrey gets angry. To make matters worse, Becca pushes Jessie away even when he tries to help her, and now she finds herself out of the Bellas and a little lost in both love and life. The Bellas only managed to get into the finals on a technicality, but the girls air out their grievances in an unorthodox manner involving yet more puke, but pull together and Becca's routine manages to impress not only the judges, but also Jessie. The second movie has the Bellas once again in disgrace and add a few new members as they compete in an international a cappella competition in order to redeem their status. And the last movie sees the Bellas reunite in a USO tour and evade Fat Amy's crime lord father in an attempt to find meaning in their lives, I guess. I'm not really sure what the motivation behind their decision is in that one, other than life is better when singing. Actually, you know what? I don't have a problem with that. Despite the financial success of the second movie, the third movie was not as profitable, and neither of them was praised to the extent of the original. As a franchise, the movies are fairly well made in terms of craft, and they're all ridiculous, so what is it about the first movie that makes it so good? I don't think that novelty should be overlooked when making a comparison between any film and its sequels. Part of what made the first movie so great was the fact that it was the first time audiences were introduced to these characters and this kind of movie. Not musicals, those have been around for a long time, but this kind of under-the-table cutthroat female-centric humor set in the world of competitive a cappella was brand new, and it clearly resonated with people. That isn't to say that this movie was created in a vacuum. The show Glee had been running for a few seasons by this point, so clearly a cappella in the media was somewhat popular, and I can only imagine that a cappella itself was somewhat more popular as a result, so it stands to reason that someone would want to create a movie and capitalize on that.
Hi, any interest in joining our a cappella group?
Oh, right. This is like a thing now.
Oh, totes.
The humor in this movie is really funny, and as I stated, it has a novel kind of comedy.
You call yourself Fat Amy?
Yeah, so twig bitches like you don't do it behind my back.
The writing is sharp and does an easy job of hiding the fact that this movie is actually pretty formulaic. It's a music competition, and that's the entire premise of the movie. And if you've seen a movie about music, it's probably a competition. Drumline, Honey, any of the Step Up movies, the main conflict in High School Musical, Whiplash to some extent, Sing. Actually, you haven't seen Sing, but I'd be willing to put money down that it's a competition. Pitch Perfect is the same as all of those, but with the focus being on a coming-of-age narrative for an edgy college girl.
Oh, I don't know. She looks a little too alternative for us.
Who finds a found family and a dude who's into her.
Then she takes off her glasses and that amazingly scary ear spike, and you realize that, she was beautiful the whole time.
I wear glasses.
Then you're halfway there.
Okay, that was actually smooth as fuck. The climactic story of winning a competition has played out over and over again, so Pitch Perfect is not novel that way, not even a little bit. But audiences love an underdog story, and the climax always gives a cathartic endorphin rush, so I'm not about to malign a narrative formula if it works. Pitch Perfect does, however, have an interesting twist on the formula, as the beginning of the movie introduces us to Aubrey and Chloe, who are important characters and establish the stakes of the movie, but neither of them are the main character. That's unusual, even for a movie about people working towards one goal. And Aubrey could even be considered the main antagonist for Becca, despite not being the primary antagonist. But the adherence to formula sort of begs the question about the sequels, which follow almost the exact same beats, but don't seem to land the same way. This is where the presentation of the formula becomes important, because despite growing in popularity, the world of a cappella was very new for a lot of people, and for a long time this was kind of seen as something that was not particularly cool.
Organized nerd singing.
In the real world, a cappella groups work hard to take competitions and performances seriously, and if you ever get the chance to see a group that's good at it, I highly recommend watching, because it's awesome. But instead of doubling down on this competition-style outlook, Pitch Perfect takes a comedic approach. A cappella can be super competitive and musically impressive, but at the end of the day, like anything, if you boil it down to its simplest form, it sounds kinda stupid.
We sing covers of songs, but we do it without any instruments. It's all from our mouths.
Yikes.
When you put it like that, it's funny. I mean, anything can be funny. Baseball is just dudes swinging sticks and running in circles. They just get paid millions to do it. This is, I think, the true reason why Pitch Perfect works. It's campy as fuck. And this isn't a bad thing, especially because Pitch Perfect embraces its campiness and runs with it. The movie is always riding this line between campy comedy hyperbole and realistic emotional stakes. It's a hard line to walk and get right, and it's what makes scenes like Fat Amy getting hit with a burrito work for comedy, and yet let audiences be invested in Becca's character growth. Or how there can be projectile vomit and the subsequent puke angels in the same scene as the Bellas finally learning to trust each other. There's a certain degree of believability inherent in the story and setting. None of these events would ever happen in such close succession, and it's highly unlikely that people would react in this manner. But they could. There is a kind of acceptable limit to how far-fetched things can go comedically before the emotional stakes start to fall apart. And don't get me wrong, the stakes are campy too, but the movie chooses to take them seriously, whereas it does not with the comedy. But the campiness of both of these story elements never exceeds a certain degree of believability. And it's easy to see when this doesn't work because both of the sequels struggle with that balance. Due to the nature of being sequels, these movies have to find a way to one-up the antics of the last movie, and thus the comedy has to be bigger, which pushes the limits of realism. The emotional stakes also need to be higher, meaning that these movies run the risk of jumping the shark. I think the reason the sequels don't work as well is because the emotional stakes are too unrealistic to be believable, and the comedic gags and bits are so exaggerated that they're no longer within the realm of the possible. They're still campy, probably more so than the first movie, but it was the original movie's ability to walk that line of self-aware camp and comedy without losing the dramatic, if cheesy, character arcs that made it work so well. I should probably take some time to talk about the musical theater aspects of Pitch Perfect because there are different kinds of musicals and subgenres therein, and I can just tell that all the non-musical fans out there are rolling their eyes at me. But this is important, I promise. Pitch Perfect fits into two different types of musicals. First and foremost, it's a jukebox musical. That means it has no original music in it at all. You could say that the remixes and mashups were technically composed for the film, and I would agree with that, but it isn't unusual for jukebox musicals to reorchestrate parts and rewrite lyrics. The most classic jukebox musical of all time is Mamma Mia, and a lot of ABBA's songs were reorchestrated and changed for the stage production, and again for the movie. Also, that's another musical movie that really knows how to play with camp. This gives the songs of Pitch Perfect the advantage of being recognizable and enjoyable because they've already been proven popular with audiences. This is also how a cappella works, which adds credibility to the movie's story. It also means that Becca's predilection for mashups as a producer is a believable transferable skill. The only thing that Pitch Perfect does not have in common with the traditional jukebox musical is that the songs selected do not complement the narrative, nor was the narrative written around them. The songs that are selected are for in-world competition or else in preparation for that competition. This brings us to the second subclass of musical that Pitch Perfect fits into, the backstage musical. Backstage musicals were films made really popular by Busby Berkeley in the 1930s, but have a rich tradition in the theater and on film, both before and since. They're typified by a story revolving around a theater or performing troupe and the interpersonal drama of the in-world cast as they attempt to save their show, put on a show, make a new show, save their theater, or something to do with a performance. The musical numbers are then presented to the audience as though part of the show that they're trying to put on, while the narrative plays out off or backstage, hence the name. Like Pitch Perfect, the musical numbers rarely have anything to do with what occurs between characters. They act almost as a recess from the drama. Little breaks that show off the actor's musical talents, often through complicated choreographed sequences and big chorus numbers. Very showy stuff that was quite popular for the time. It's not hard to see that Pitch Perfect fits this fairly well. I would argue that the fact that the Bellas are not putting on a show per se is only a technicality, as they are working towards a competition, which is a kind of show, and the musical numbers that pop up are always in some way related to the preparation of that show. The fact that the musical aspects of Pitch Perfect are always related to the competition, and that it's an a cappella competition, bring us to the last point about musical theater, and how that's presented to the audience. Most of the complaints I hear about musicals are that in the real world, people don't break out into song randomly. I would reply with maybe you should hang out with some cooler and happier people because I sing all the fucking time. But I get it. Breaking into song and doing pirouettes in the middle of your racially charged gang fight is a bit strange. But Pitch Perfect mitigates this strangeness in a few ways. The first has to do with the fact that it's a backstage musical and its realism. Because all of the musical numbers are performed within the context of the competition, Pitch Perfect never compromises its comedic realism by having songs occur in places that they would not in the real world. Even the musical numbers that occur outside of the usual performance space are still realistic. On the bus, the Bellas sing together spontaneously, and who has not done that on a road trip? Chloe overhears Becca in the shower and they sing a duet in harmony, and this is played out for laughs because they're in the shower and naked, but the singing aspect of this scene is very similar to how actual singers interact with each other. They're just weird people that way, but this isn't because of any cinematic artifice. Also, who doesn't sing in the shower? All of the occasions in which the Bellas sing rides that line of camp and realism. Even the riff-off, where singers have to pick up words from other songs, is realistic. If you're familiar enough with songs and lyrics, you can probably pull that off. In fact, I would argue that the most unrealistic aspect about the way the music is presented to the audience is in how polished everything sounds. If the riff-off was that spontaneous, there's no way the backup singers would be that coordinated. Or the first time the Bellas try a mashup and sound that good without any rehearsal, as a musician, I'm offended with how unrealistic that is, more than where or when the songs happen. Apart from when the songs happen, there's also the issue of where the fuck the music is coming from. This dude named Pierre Schaeffer came up with this idea called the acousmatic sound. Basically, any sound that doesn't have an identifiable source is acousmatic. Of course, right now you know the sound is coming from your speakers or your headphones, and definitely not your phone because your ears deserve better audio than that. But we can also identify sound sources on screen and differentiate them within what we call the diegesis, or the universe of the film. When a character talks or, God forbid, sings, we know where the sound source is. We can see them. But this is not always the case. Films love to play with audio for different effects, and we can get voiceovers where no sound source is identifiable for the voice. This is an acousmatic sound. But because we know all sounds have to come from something, this other French dude named Michel Chion came up with the word acousmetre to describe the object or source of a sound before it's been revealed to the audience. An imaginary object that has no shape or form but must exist for a sound to have been made. Think about the way that you always hear my voice when I'm talking, but the only picture you have of me is this shitty little MS Paint drawing. You don't actually know what I look like, so I'm an acousmetre. Now this is some pretty neat stuff, but what does it have to do with musicals? Well, have you ever sat and thought about where a film score comes from when you watch the movie? Obviously, an orchestra was recorded playing the music, but that sound source never appears on screen, and yet it is presented to the audience as part of the movie, but not quite within the diegesis. The music is in this bizarre space between the diegesis and the audience. We understand that it's not in the story, but it adds to our viewing pleasure. What I think people react negatively to in musicals is the characters within the diegesis engaging with the acousmatic sound of an extra diegetic music, which may reduce the suspension of disbelief. The music is no longer just for the audience's appreciation, it's now a part of the action itself, and that could be jarring. But Pitch Perfect doesn't suffer from this issue, because as the movie loves to remind us over and over again,
It's all from our mouth.
so the issue of where the music is coming from is easily sidestepped. No pesky extra diegetic suspension of disbelief, because it's all right there on screen. As long as you're cool with knowing the performance on screen is matched to recordings done beforehand, there's no issue. How musical numbers are presented to the audience visually and performatively is also a factor in why Pitch Perfect draws in non-musical audiences. Film is, after all, an auditory and visual medium. Apart from the songs themselves, musicals are also famous for their choreography. Pitch Perfect can easily explain this away because a big part of real-world a cappella competitions is their performative routines, and so dance is a part of the movie, but only presented in that context. And even though the songs presented were all recorded beforehand and then lip-synced for the filming of the movie, within the movie's universe, it is clear we are watching the song and dance unfold at the same time. We still get that campiness, as Chloe is apparently able to hit the low bass notes now, which is impossible, and if you look at her during the performance, she is not singing those parts, but it's just camp. It doesn't detract from the enjoyment of the film. Because this is a backstage musical, the audience within the movie that attends the competition becomes a stand-in and an excuse to perform for the real-world audience. But that real-world audience is not treated as a static viewer with an immovable perspective. Despite the directional aspect of the stage the Bellas perform on, this is still a film. There are shots that we get of the Bellas that the in-world audience would never be privy to. If the movie can present the songs in a way that draws attention to the act of filming, then what's the point of having an audience in the movie as an excuse for the performance? Nowhere is it more apparent that this is a film than in the audition sequence, where each singer's audition is presented to the audience as one piece rather than sequentially. The camera draws attention to the act of filming by quickly cutting between characters and sometimes splitting the screen. That's something you can't do in any other medium, but I would argue that this is also part of the comedy. The audition process is understood to be happening in linear time, but is mashed up for the purposes of presentation. This is not a new technique in film, and it also has the added effect of creating a full song out of all the people auditioning. It's really cool. This is the closest Pitch Perfect ever gets to having a full-out traditional musical number, but because it's presented as a filming device rather than a musical theater one, I think the movie can get away with it. It's humorous, and it's used to tell the story of the auditions rather than to present a musical number. And if this number can get away with a filming device for the purposes of storytelling, then any of the other less egregious filming techniques, such as crane shots or pans and zooms, are easily excusable. And that is really the secret behind all of Pitch Perfect as a musical film. The music is the central focus of the movie by both those who watch it and the characters within the story, but there seems to be an agreement by everyone involved that no one is going to start singing randomly with music that comes from nowhere. The musical theater and cinematic aspects of the type of musical that Pitch Perfect is, and the way the story is presented as about a music competition, means that the musical numbers do not happen in places that they wouldn't in real life. But most importantly, all of these work towards and are inherent in the movie's uncanny ability to walk the line between being believably realistic and a campy comedy. Musicals themselves are already in the world of camp, but by grounding these aspects with a certain degree of realism in its presentation to the audience, it is possible to create a comedically over-the-top musical that even people who don't like musicals will enjoy. And that is why Pitch Perfect is the best musical for people who hate musicals. Here are my stray thoughts. Despite my admiration for this movie, I will always be a sucker for original music in musicals. It's interesting how much time this movie spends looking and talking about the Bella's appearance. Makes me think that there could be something in regards to the female gaze, especially because this movie was overwhelmingly directed towards and created by females. You can actually see a lot of Elizabeth Banks' influence in this movie and her later work as a director. I have to say that Fat Amy I think works best as a comedic relief character, and a part of the reason the sequels don't work for me is because they lean too heavy on her for drama. Also, apparently there's going to be a Pitch Perfect TV show. I wonder if it'll be anything like HSMT MTS. Hey, thanks so much for watching that video. If you're looking for another cheesy musical kind of show that's very much like Pitch Perfect and actually has a couple of people from Pitch Perfect in it, I highly recommend Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. It's really campy and they sing songs out of nowhere, unlike Pitch Perfect, but they're all happening within people's minds, so it kind of gets away with it. Don't forget to check out our other channel, the Cinemasters, for more cool conversations about movies, and like and subscribe so you'll never miss another episode of This Is a Thing, the long and the short of it, and lots of other really awesome ideas right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.